Hi, I'm Zoe from Oodles of Craft, and today we're going to make some gorgeous little gift bags. They're drawstring and inside they have a French seam so there's no raw edges. Let's see how you get on.
Step 1. Get your resources ready. To make your fabric gift bags, you're going to need a pen or a pencil, a ruler, and these are going to help you draw your pattern out. You're going to need some pattern paper. My pattern paper has squares on it, which helps, but it doesn't matter if yours is completely plain, or you could use greaseproof paper from the kitchen. Some craft scissors, some fabric scissors, and I also have thread snips. When I'm making, as I cut my threads, I tend to put them straight in a bowl that acts as my bin. In order to make the bag, you're going to actually need some ribbon or cord, some thread, some fabric, which is non-directional, and some pins. For best practice, you will also need to use your iron, but turn the steam off, and an ironing board. Let's get going. Step 2. Make a template. To make your pattern piece, you're going to need to get your paper. I'm going to do this as if I don't have squares on my paper. So if you've got a blank sheet of paper or some tracing paper, it's absolutely fine. So make sure you have a straight edge to start with, and then place your ruler down, making sure your 0 is at the edge of the paper, and then put a dot where you reach 20 centimeters. Do the same a little bit further down, so 20 centimeters, and one more a little bit lower from 0, put a dot at 20 centimeters. You're then going to join those dots up to make sure you have a straight line. Then we're going to do exactly the same, but we need to measure downwards instead. So this time you're going to measure 15 centimeters. So line your 0 up with the top edge and put a dot at 15 centimeters. Move it along, 0 at the top, put a dot at 15 centimeters, and then once more on the other side. That way, when you join all your dots up, you have a perfectly straight line. So the overall pattern piece is 20 centimeters by 15 centimeters. You then take your craft scissors and carefully cut your pattern out following the lines that you have made. Remember to always cut away from you. Put the bottom blade along the table and open the blades as wide as they'll go, and that will give you a nice clean straight line. So that I don't have to make more than one pattern piece over and over again, I then label my pattern piece and keep it in a plastic wallet. So this is your gift bag template, and then I write down how much you need to cut. So in this case, we're going to be cutting one piece of fabric, but we're cutting it on the fold, and that will make sense as we move through the project. I'm now drawing on which section of the pattern needs to be placed on the fold. So if you could do the same on your pattern piece, that will be helpful for future reference. And then I like to just put the sizes of the pattern piece. This is so that if I've got some scrap pieces, I know whether or not they will fit. Step 3. Cut the fabric. The fabric I've chosen for my project is non-directional, which means it doesn't matter which way up the pattern piece goes. At the side here you can see the selvage edge. This has lots and lots of tiny dots in it where it's been stored on the roll. We're going to avoid this edge when placing our pattern piece down. Firstly, fold your fabric in half, right sides together. So if you can see, this is the right side, this is the wrong side. we need right sides together. I'm then going to place my pattern piece on top, and remember earlier we said this section needed to be placed on the fold. So I'm going to position mine right there on the folded piece of fabric. So as mentioned before, make sure you avoid placing your pattern piece on the selvage edge. I'm taking my pins and I'm putting one in each corner, making sure that the pins don't stick out over the edge of the pattern piece itself, because we're going to be cutting around the edge. You want to make sure that when you've pinned through the layers that it is completely flat on the front and at the back as well. Once pinned in place, you're going to cut your fabric out using your fabric scissors. These are much sharper than craft scissors. So I'm going to put my 4 fingers into the large section and my thumb in the small one. The bottom blade is going to rest against my table, and I'm going to open the scissors wide to make sure I take nice, long, clean cuts. You should hear a really satisfying sound when you do yours. Step 4. Cut the fabric and measure. We can now remove the pins from our template. And you should be left with one super large rectangle, perfect for your bag making. Now today, for making our bag, we're going to do something a little bit different than usual. We're actually going to fold our fabric wrong sides together. So if I open this up, you will see that the wrong side, the back of the fabric, is hiding inside our project at the moment. If it's cut well, all the raw edges should match up at the sides and at the top. We're now going to take our ruler and measure 7 centimeters down from the top open edge. And I'm going to position a pin where the 7 centimeter mark is. Now, because this is where I want to stop sewing, I'm actually going to position 2 pins in exactly the same place. So it's not a case of one pin where I would take it out and carry on. This is almost acting as a buffer to remind me to stop sewing at this point. I'm then going to position one more pin just to hold those 2 pieces of fabric in the right place. So just a reminder, it's 7 centimeters down from the top edge and then pin. And we're going to do the same on the other side. So I put my 0 mark at the top and I'm going to measure down 7 centimeters. Once I've got to my 7 centimeters, I will put 2 pins into position. Once again, I'm going to pop one more pin just sticking out the side to hold those 2 layers of fabric together. So that's 7 centimeters down from the top, either side, and I've put my double pin to remind me. So I'm going to be sewing from the bottom fold up to those double pins, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. Step 5, sew the 2 sides. Before I start sewing any new project, I like to test my thread tension first. So I've got a scrap piece of fabric and folded it in half to represent the 2 layers. I'm making sure my threads are underneath my presser foot and tucked out the back like a tail. I lower my presser foot and just start sewing. I just want to see whether the stitches are the same top and bottom. So when you've reached the end, lift your presser foot up, pull your project out to the side and cut it out there so you're leaving some threads behind. Snip your loose threads off either end, and then you're looking to see if your stitches are the same on the top as they are on the back. There shouldn't be any loopy bits or pulls. If it looks right, then you're ready to sew. So here's our bag. The fold is at the top now. So I'm holding it folded edge first towards my machine, and I'm going to start sewing and stop when I reach my double pins. So I want a fairly narrow seam allowance to begin with. So when I put my fabric underneath the presser foot, I'm going to lower my presser foot down, and the edge of the fabric is actually in line with the edge of my presser foot. I'm going to use my little smiley face seam guide to put in place to make sure I stay on track and keep in a straight line. So I'm going to sew forward for 3 stitches, then back for 3 stitches, down to the double pins and stop. When I reach those pins, I will go backwards 3 steps and then forwards to stop. So forwards for 1, 2 and 3, then go back towards the edge again, and then I'm going to go forwards. As you go, you need to take your pins out. Never sew over a pin just in case it snaps your needle. You're much safer removing them as you go. Now the problem is with my seam guide, when I get close with these pins, because this is the one I need as my break, I'm actually going to move my seam guide out of the way and sew close to those pins without going over them. So when I get close, I'm going to stop. I'm going to reverse for 3 stitches, and then I will go forward for a couple of stitches. Don't go over those pins though. Remove them when you're done, lift your presser foot, slide your fabric out to the side and cut over there so you have a tail of threads left. Cut your threads off at both ends. Make sure your thread tails are underneath your presser foot and out the back, ready for your next row of stitches. So you can see the folded edge was at the top. We sewed down to the double pin. We now need to do the same on the other side. So I flip mine over to make it easier because I'm working with the same side of the project. Trap my fabric once it's in position. I can put my seam guide in place to help keep me straight. I'm going to go forward for a few stitches, then backwards to secure those stitches. I don't want my project unraveling in the wash. And then I'm going to go forwards, taking the pins out as I go until I reach the double pin. Same as before, when I get close, I'll need to move my seam guide. I'm going to go close to the pins but not quite reach them. Go backwards for a few stitches, forwards again for a couple of stitches, and that should secure them nicely. Take your pins out, lift your presser foot, pull that fabric out to the side and cut the threads off both ends. And there you have it. You have done your first set of stitching, starting at the fold, going down to the double pin area. So you should still have a bag that opens. Step 6. Tuck in and sew. You'll now see why it's important to have non-directional fabric. This is the top of our bag and this is the bottom fold. And when we turn it over, it looks the same front and back. Nothing is upside down. So we're going to fold this first piece down until it reaches your stitch line. And these 2 top corners, we're going to need to tuck them in and then iron them flat. So I'm putting my finger where that 7 centimeter stitch line went up to. I folded over the corner by about 1 centimeter, and the same on the other side. I've given it a finger press, and that'll just make it easier when I then use the iron. So I'm not having to put my fingers close to that iron. So remember, it's important to have your steam turned off if you're doing this to make sure that you don't get a steam burn. So I've tucked those two corners in by 1 centimetre and ironed them flat. And I'm now going to do the same on the other flap. So I'm going to fold this first flap open, flop it down up to the stitches you sewed earlier. Fold your top corners in and give them a finger press by approximately 1 centimetre, and the same on the other side. Another finger press, and then use your iron to iron them flat. So you've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 corners folded in. The next job is to carefully sew those sections down. 4 corners means 4 lines of sewing. So threads underneath the presser foot and out the back. Then start with one of your corners, so open it up. Position your fabric so that the cut line is facing straight towards you and not the fold line. You want to sew along the cut line. Once your fabric is in the right place, make sure you've trapped your fabric. Then you're going to go forward a few stitches, backward a few stitches, and then forward down to the bottom of the line. Make sure that you do this at the other end of your stitches as well. So go slowly, there is no rush, and don't go over that fold of fabric. Only go as far as the bottom of your tucked in edge. Once you're done, pull your fabric out, snip your threads from both ends, and hopefully that tuck line is now secured in place. So I'll do one more together with you. This time I'm going to start at the folded edge. I've positioned my fabric. I'm going to go forward a few stitches, backwards a few stitches to secure it. And then I'm going to go forwards towards the edge. Once I'm there, I'm going to go backwards a few stitches to secure them in place. Lift, pull, and snip. You have 2 more corners to do, so make sure you do all 4 in total. Step 7, turn it through and sew 2 sides. This is my folded edge and this is the top of the fabric, but my raw edges are on the outside. So I'm going to turn my bag inside out, pushing my fingers up into those bottom corners to make them sharp and pointy. I'm then going to flatten it out, give the sides a little massage with my fingers on both sides, and then I'm going to use my iron to set those seams. So this is the open section of the bag at the top. We are going to be sewing up the side of the bag just past where the folded edge begins, and then we're going to sew off the edge. And we're going to do the same on both sides. So as we go to the machine, the folded edge will be at the top. We're going to sew down one side and off the edge, then we'll flip it round, sew down one side and off the edge. So my threads need to go under my presser foot and out the back. Remember, the folded edge is going to go under the machine first, and then this time, whereas we were in line with the presser foot earlier, We're now actually going to need to be a little bit wider because we don't want to see any of those raw edges from the outside when we're finished. So I'm moving my project across and then positioning my seam guide. Trap your fabric when you're in position, and then I'm going to go forward a few stitches, backward a few stitches, and then I'm going to sew down to my folded tuck. Now remember, I'm going to go about 3 stitches past the corner and then off the edge. So let's sew. I'm going forwards for 3, back stitch to secure my stitching, and then I'm going to sew forwards down to that folded tuck. Take your time and make sure you stay in alignment. So now that I'm coming close to that folded tuck that I made earlier, I'm going to use my hand wheel to make sure I can hand stitch a couple of stitches forward. So I'm going to go 3 stitches further down, and then I need to leave my needle down, lift my presser foot, spin the project so that the edge is pointing towards me, lower the presser foot, and then go forwards towards the edge, then backwards, then forwards to finish. Lift your presser foot when done, pull your project out to the side, cut your threads so there's still a tail, and then snip the threads right by the fabric. So just to recap, we have sewn down from the fold, down towards the open edge, and when we reached the corner of that tuck that we made earlier, we sewed a few more lines and then sewed off the edge. Now flip your project over and do exactly the same on the other side. So remember, your project needs to be wider than the sewing foot to make sure that your seam allowance is hidden once we turn this the right way round. I'm going to go forward for a few stitches, then backwards for a few stitches, and then we're going to sew down to that tucked edge. Once we reach the edge of that tuck, we're going to go 3 more stitches further on. So I'm using my hand wheel for 1, 2, and 3 stitches. I'm leaving my needle down, lift the presser foot, spin the fabric so the raw edge is towards me, trap the fabric, and then go forwards, reverse stitch to secure your stitching, couple of stitches forward, and then you can remove your project. Same as usual, leave a tail, but cut the threads close to the fabric. So to recap again, we went down towards that tucked edge, took a few stitches past the actual tip, kept our needle down, and then sewed towards the edge. You've now created your French seams. Step 8, create the channel. So here's our bag with French seams. The fold is at the bottom and the opening is at the top, and we're going to create the casing for the ribbon to go inside. So I'm going to fold the top edge down by 1 centimetre and give it a good finger press. So remember, the reason for the finger press is so that your fingers don't go near the hot plate of the iron. So that's a 1 centimetre fold down. And then that folded edge we've created, we're going to fold it down to meet the 2 stitch lines that went off the edge of our project. So I'm going to fold that folded edge down to the 2 lines of stitching, carefully finger press it, and then iron into position. You're actually going to do the same on the other side. So fold down the top edge by 1 centimetre, finger press, and then iron into position. And then take the folded edge and meet the 2 lines of stitching that you created earlier. Again, finger press and iron into position. You've now created your casing for the ribbon to go through. So to make sure that stays in place, I'm going to pop some pins. I'm going to use my small ones for this. Now when I place my pins in, I want to do each of the channels separately. So I want to still be able to get my hand inside the bag. You're not pinning all the layers together. So if it's easier, slide your hand inside the bag as you pin. Make sure when you get to the edges that you're kind of folding that folded side inside the channel and pin it in place. Keep going all the way round. If it looks like it's bunched up a little bit, don't worry about it at all, because this is a drawstring bag, so the whole point of the design is that it will scrunch together anyway. So once again, I'm folding that side edge underneath the casing and sticking a pin in to hold it in place. I can still get my hand inside the bag and it's pinned all the way round. Step 9. Sew the channel. Now ordinarily, if your bag is bigger, you would take off this section of your sewing machine. So my sewing machine, this section just slides off to the side, and you would put your bag almost like you were putting an arm through a sleeve, and it would slide over the top. However, this bag is smaller than the sewing machine arm, so we can't use that technique for this particular project. What I'm going to do instead is carefully put the bottom layer underneath my presser foot. So I'm going to slide it under, making sure that the top edge isn't there, and I'm feeling for that folded edge to make sure that I'm sewing it down. So my needle actually needs to be to the right of that folded edge. I'm going to carefully position my fabric so that it's not going to get caught when I'm sewing, and I'm going to take my pins out as I sew. Now this time I'm not reverse stitching, I'm just going to go straight into sewing, because as I move my way around the channel, I'm going to finish where I started and reverse stitch then. So I will go over those first stitches when I get to the end. So very carefully take your time with this, because it's slow and because it's small, you're more likely to be more effective with your final creation. So I just keep readjusting the fabric, keeping my fingers away from the needle itself, taking the pins out as I go. So always stop when you take your pin out to stay in control of your sewing machine. I'm only pressing very lightly on my foot pedal because I want this to go nice and slowly. I'm easing my way round. I'm making sure that my seam allowance is always the same. As I go over the side sections, there is a lot of layers of fabric, so just take it easy. Use your hand wheel if you need to kind of hand stitch over that section if your machine's not quite powerful enough. I'm now getting close to where I started. I can see my loose ends, so I'm just pulling those out to the side so that I don't stitch them down. And then I'm going to overlap the stitches where I started. This will make sure that those first ones are secured. And once done, I will reverse a few stitches to make sure that the end of the stitching is also secured. Lift your presser foot up and then cut all of those loose threads off. You'll have 2 at the front and 2 at the back. That's your last piece of sewing. You should now have a super tidy bag. Step 10. Thread ribbon through the channel. So in order to do this, we're going to turn our bag the right side out, and hopefully you won't see any fabric sticking out of the sides. I'm going to stick my fingers into the corners and pull that channel upwards. It's always good practice to give your bag a press at every stage. So I'm just giving the seam allowances a little bit of a massage to make sure they're in place, and iron them flat to set the seam. In terms of your ribbon, you're going to need 2 lengths that go all the way around the bag and out the other side. So I'm going to leave approximately a hand width hanging out the side. So that's about there. And then I'm going to double that length because I need it to go all the way round. So just to show you, it will look something like that. Now, because I need 2 lengths, I'm going to line up those ribbon pieces and cut another one exactly the same size as the first one we measured out. So you'll need different sizes of ribbon depending on the size of your gift bag that you're making. So I'll put that one to one side, and then I'm going to use my safety pin. So the safety pin will help us get the ribbon through the casing. So I'm going to push the safety pin carefully through one end of the ribbon and close it over. So I've now got my ribbon attached to my safety pin, and I'm going to feed my safety pin through the channel that I've created. So I'm going to start at this one side and carefully push the safety pin through. And then I'm going to scrunch it, scrunch it, scrunch it, scrunch it, scrunch it, and pull it through. Scrunch it. Oh, out it pops. Feed it through the other side of the casing. Scrunch it, scrunch it, scrunch it, pull it through. Keep scrunching, keep pulling until you end up back where you started again. The safety pin can pull out this time. You undo your safety pin, remove the ribbon from it, and then that will leave a bit of a tatty end. So you're just going to snip that. I like to do it on a diagonal to help prevent fraying, so I'll do the same to the other end. And then I need to tie a knot because I don't want these to fall out. So I'm going to get the 2 pieces of ribbon together. I'm making a loop, and then I'm pushing the ends of the ribbon through the loop. Once you've done that, give them a pull, and you've created a knot to secure that in place. So we now need to do exactly the same with the other piece of ribbon, but this time we're starting from the other side. So feed your ribbon onto your safety pin. Make sure your safety pin is closed again. So we're going to start from this side. So I'm pushing it through, scrunching the fabric of the channel up, and then pull that safety pin to bring the ribbon through with it. When you reach that edge, make sure you go back through the casing on the other side and keep pulling. You might feel a little bit of resistance, but it should be fairly plain sailing. You go all the way round back to where you started. Let the safety pin come out. Pull the ribbon out with it. Then undo your safety pin and trim off those tatty ends again. So I'm going to cut the tatty one on a diagonal, and I'll also trim the other end on a diagonal as well. And then just as before, we're going to layer the ribbon on top of each other. Make a loop with both of them, and then push the ends of the ribbon through the loop to create that final knot. And there you have it. You've made your very own gift bag with French seams. So to use it, you pull on the two sides of ribbon and it should concertina close. And to open it again, you just pop your fingers inside and pull. Well done. I hope you're as proud of it as I am of you.
So, how did you get on? Hopefully now you've all got your own little drawstring bag. However, you could make them even bigger. So I have another one here. The written instructions have the sizes that you need to make this particular design. And I would say they're not just for gift bags. I also use mine. This one, for example, keeps my embroidery kit in. So I have the project that I'm working on inside. It's big enough to hold my embroidery hoop and some embroidery floss and my little scissors. And that way, whenever I go somewhere, I can take my bag with me. Tag me at Oodles of Craft on Facebook and Instagram with your makes. I'd love to see how well you got on.